Sometimes it feels like building a brand online. It's all about just chasing links, right? What if I told you there's like a whole other layer of visibility that most people miss today? We're diving into the power of brand mentions.
Yeah, it is fascinating how much impact just a simple mention can have. Think
Yeah.
about it. Someone is reading a forum post, maybe, looking for advice, and they see your brand name pop up in a positive light. That's instant credibility right there, even if there's no link to your website.
Interesting. So we've got research, articles, even some case studies, all about brand mentions. And the goal today is to really understand not just what they are, but how they work, how you can use them to your advantage.
Yeah, and I think the timing's perfect for this
Yeah.
because it sounds like you're feeling a bit lost in all the online noise. Brand mentions are a way to kind of cut through that. They build awareness, trust, and even influence search engines, all without needing that traditional link back to your site.
Okay, so let's break this down. First things first. What exactly counts as a brand mention? Is it just someone linking to my website?
It's actually much broader than that. It's anytime your brand is referenced online, whether it's your company name, your products, even your tagline.
Got it, got it. So if someone tweets about how much they love my new product, even without like tagging my business or anything, that's still a mention.
Absolutely. That's
Oh,
what we call an indirect mention. And those can be just as valuable as a direct link. Imagine someone searching online for reviews
hmm.
or recommendations. They might stumble across that tweet and boom, you're suddenly on their radar.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I see how that builds awareness. But you mentioned trust too. How does a random mention online actually translate to people trusting my brand?
Hmm. Think about it this way. Think about word of mouth, but amplified. If you hear a friend raving about a new restaurant, you're way more likely to try it than if you just saw an ad.
True.
It's the same thing online.
hmm.
People trust recommendations from other users, even if they don't know them personally.
So these mentions are like little seeds of trust being
Yeah.
planted all over the internet.
Exactly. And the more those seeds are planted, the more your brand grows in terms of credibility
Mhm.
and reputation. And this is especially powerful if you're like a local business. Google actually looks at these mentions,
Mm.
particularly in online reviews, to determine how relevant and trustworthy you are within your local community.
Oh, interesting. So more mentions can actually mean a higher ranking in local search results, even without direct links.
That's right. Search engines are getting smarter all the time. They're looking for signals that go beyond just keywords and backlinks. Brand mentions are a powerful way to show that people are talking about you, engaging with your brand, and ultimately recommending you to others.
This is all starting to click now. Okay, so we understand what mentions are, why they matter, but how do we actually make them happen? I'm guessing creating awesome content is a good starting point.
Content is definitely key. But let's assume you've got that covered, right? You're already creating those engaging blog posts, sharing valuable insights on social media, all that good stuff. What we want to explore now are some of the more unconventional tactics for generating buzz and getting people talking about you.
Ooh, I like unconventional. Our research actually highlighted some really creative guerrilla marketing examples, like things that make a big impact without needing a huge budget.
Right. One that really stood out to me was this small bakery that partnered with a local florist. So every bouquet delivery
Yeah.
included a voucher for a free pastry from the bakery.
That's brilliant. So simple, yet so effective. I bet it got people talking, taking pictures, sharing it on social media, all of that.
Exactly. It created that natural buzz,
hmm.
both online and offline, and probably cost them next to nothing. It's a great example of how thinking outside the box can lead to those unexpected brand mentions and a surge in local awareness.
It also kind of plays into that idea of doing good, which our sources emphasized, as a really powerful way to generate positive brand mentions.
Yeah, definitely. Consumers today are increasingly drawn to businesses that
Yeah.
line with their values, right?
Whether it's supporting a local charity, adopting sustainable practices, or even just treating your employees well. These actions speak volumes. And guess what? People talk about it.
It's like good karma that also boosts your brand image. I like it. So we've got guerrilla marketing, we've got social responsibility. Any other surprising ways to get people talking about our brand?
Well, partnering with other brands is a fantastic way to amplify your reach. Think about businesses that complement yours, even if they're not direct competitors. Like a local bookstore teaming up with a coffee shop to host a monthly book club, for example.
Ah, I see what you're getting at. They tap into each other's audience, get cross-promotion on social media.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation where both brands benefit from increased visibility and brand mentions. Plus, it gives people something to talk about, a fun event a unique collaboration, it generates even more buzz.
So we've got this buzz going, our brand is floating around the internet. Now what? Do we just sit back and hope for the best? Not quite. This is where it gets even more strategic. We can't just passively wait for mentions to happen. We need to actively listen for them.
You mean like monitoring social media, online forums, to see what people are saying about us?
That's part of it. But it's more than just damage control. Every mention, positive or negative, offers valuable insight.
So even a negative review can be useful.
Absolutely. It might sting a little bit, but it's an opportunity to understand what we could be doing better. Maybe there's a genuine issue we need to address. Or perhaps it's just a misunderstanding we can clarify.
And on the flip side, positive mentions can tell us what we're doing well, what resonates with our audience.
Exactly. It's about gathering intel, understanding how people perceive your brand, and using that information to refine your strategy. You know, there are tools that can help you monitor these mentions, but the real key is what you do with that information.
Okay, this is all making sense, but I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. It seems like a lot to keep track of.
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. We'll break it down step by step. In fact, after a quick break, we'll dive into some common mistakes people make when it comes to brand mentions, pitfalls you'll want to avoid as you start incorporating this into your strategy.
All right, so we've got this whole new world of brand mentions opening up. And honestly, a little daunting. You mentioned some common mistakes. Let's dive into those. What are some pitfalls we should watch out for?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is ignoring those negative mentions. It's tempting to just bury your head in the sand and pretend they don't exist. But that can really backfire.
Yeah, I can see how that would make things worse. Like if I see a company constantly getting slammed with bad reviews and they never respond, I'm definitely not going to feel very confident doing business with them.
Exactly. Unaddressed negative feedback can spread like wildfire online and seriously damage your reputation. Instead of ignoring it, you need to have a strategy in place for dealing with these mentions head on.
So what's the best approach then? Do we need to craft the perfectly worded response to every single negative comment?
No, it doesn't have to be that complicated. The key is to acknowledge the issue, show that you're listening, and offer a solution if possible. Even a simple, hey, we hear you, we're looking into this, can go a long way in showing that you care.
Right, and sometimes taking the conversation offline can be helpful too, like offering to connect with that person directly to resolve the issue.
Absolutely. It shows you're taking their concerns seriously. You're willing to go the extra mile to make things right. Plus, it prevents things from escalating publicly.
Okay, so we've tackled the negative side of things. What about the opposite? Getting too caught up in chasing as many mentions as possible, even if they're not from, like, quality sources.
Yes. That's another common trap. Prioritizing quantity over quality. 100 mentions on random scammy websites aren't going to do much good.
So how do we know which mentions are actually worth pursuing then? Is it all about getting featured on those big-name industry blogs?
It's more about understanding your target audience. Think about where they spend their time online. What websites, what platforms do they trust? A glowing review on a niche forum that's highly relevant to your industry could be way more valuable than a passing mention on a huge but unrelated website.
It's about finding those sweet spots where your ideal customers are actually hanging out.
Yeah.
And making sure your brand is part of the conversation.
Exactly. And that ties back to something we talked about earlier, the authority of the source. A mention on a well-respected, authoritative website carries way more weight than a mention on some random blog that nobody's ever heard of.
So when we're evaluating the value of a mention, we need to consider both the relevance to our audience and the overall authority of the source.
Exactly. It's like getting a recommendation from a trusted expert versus a random stranger on the street. One is clearly going to have a much bigger impact.
This is all making so much sense. Okay, so we're focusing on quality over quantity, targeting mentions from sources that our customers actually trust. Any other hidden traps we should be aware of?
Well, there's one that often gets overlooked, and that's the power of unlinked mentions.
Wait, those count too, even if they don't directly link back to our website?
Absolutely. While a link is always great for SEO, an unlinked mention still contributes to that brand awareness and can even influence local SEO. Think about it. Someone's reading a blog post, mentions your company in a positive light, even without a link. They might be intrigued enough to Google you and learn more.
It's like planting seeds. Even if they haven't sprouted into full-blown links yet, those unlinked mentions are still creating ripples of awareness. that can lead to bigger things down the road.
Precisely. And it circles back to those indirect mentions we discussed earlier. Even a casual name drop without a link reinforces your brand's presence in the online world.
So we're not just chasing links, we're building this whole web of awareness, trust, recognition, and every mention plays a role in that, whether it's linked or not.
Now you're getting it. It's about creating this holistic online presence where every interaction, every piece of content, every mention contributes to that bigger goal of building a strong, respected brand.
This has been incredibly eye-opening, but I have to admit I'm still wondering how we actually measure the impact of all these brand mentions. Like, is it even possible to track whether those mentions are translating into, tangible results?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into next. We'll explore the world of metrics and analytics and how to understand if those online conversations are actually impacting your bottom line.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the big question. How do we actually know if all this effort around brand mentions is actually paying off? How do we measure the impact?
Yeah, that's where we really shift gears from strategy to analysis, and luckily there's some concrete ways to track the effectiveness of your brand mentions.
Okay, so it's not just about counting how many times our name pops up online. There's got to be more to it than that, right?
Right, you're absolutely right. It's about looking beyond just the sheer volume of mentions and considering the quality, the context, and the overall sentiment.
Okay, break that down for me. What are some of the key metrics we should be tracking?
So first, you want to look at the volume of mentions over time. Are you seeing an upward trend? That's usually a good sign that your efforts are gaining traction. But, like we talked about earlier, we also need to consider the authority and relevance of those sources.
Right, so if I'm getting a ton of mentions on some tiny forum that's only vaguely related to my industry, that's not necessarily a cause for celebration.
Exactly. It's about understanding your target audience and focusing on building a strong presence in the spaces where they actually hang out. A handful of positive mentions from influential voices in your field can be way more valuable than a flood of generic mentions from irrelevant sources.
Makes sense. So we're tracking volume, source quality. What about sentiment? Are we manually reading every single mention and labeling it as positive, negative, or neutral?
Well, there are tools that can help analyze sentiment automatically, which can save you a ton of time and effort, but it's always a good idea to spot check a sample yourself, just to make sure the tool is accurately capturing the nuances of the conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got volume, source quality, sentiment. What else should we be looking at?
Don't forget about reach. This refers to the potential audience that's exposed to your brand mentions. A mention on a popular blog with thousands of readers is obviously going to have a wider reach than a comment on a small niche forum.
It's like those ripples in the pond we talked about earlier. Some mentions create bigger waves than others.
Exactly. And ultimately, we want to connect all of this back to tangible business results. Are your brand mentions leading to increased website traffic, more social media engagement? Are those local rankings climbing?
This is where the rubber meets the road, right? We want to see how these online conversations are impacting our bottom line.
Absolutely. While it can be challenging, to directly attribute specific outcomes to brand mentions alone, tracking these metrics over time can give you a really clear picture of the overall trend and help you adjust your strategy accordingly.
So it's not just about passively observing, it's about actively analyzing and refining our approach. Based on the data we're seeing, we're like data-driven brand mention ninjas.
That's the spirit. It's an ongoing process of learning, adapting, and optimizing to make sure those brand mentions are working hard for you.
This deep dive has been incredible. We went from what's a mention to understanding how they can build our online presence and even measure their impact. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for success.
And that's what we want, to give you the knowledge and insights to really navigate this crazy digital world.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Until next time.